All right, continuing with our alternator swap here on our 2006 Nissan Xterra. But here's the access while you're at the alternator through the wheel opening, having removed the fender liner, as shown by other guys, rather than, you know, taking off the power steering pump and the fan shroud and the radiator hose from the top. That's just crazy business. Having mentioned removed that big piece right there, which is really just a bunch of screws, and finagle it out. So looking in here, you can see that for going back in, it was really a tight wobble to get it off of this bracket right here. You see, the alternator has ears that go between here and there. And what happens when they tighten up one of these with a floating bushing, and let's put it the right way, it goes that way in there, you get this floating bushing that then tightens up against that bracket. So to ease installation, we're going to simply, we're not going to wail on it, we're just going to get it to move incrementally. I probably did it right there, into the housing, such that when we try to put it in place there, we don't have to pound it, lever it, start using foul language. You know the drill with these Nissans. A lot of us are doing more of this stuff ourselves with this COVID business going on. So let's take a quick look here while I have my little light going, and you can see the connections. That's the main connection to the alternator, kind of a one-wire hookup, and then there's a, the signal for the gauges and what have you over here that plugs into the side of it. Now here's one little tip. There's a wire harness right here, the big harness that this is all part of. You can release this clip. There's like a little tongue here you can depress, pop that clip so that this harness has a bit more motion here, and you'll be able to reach these wires a little easier. Those are the only two plugs for the alternator. I'm going to try to plug them in before I position it in place. All right, as we continue here, here's a little note to Nissan engineers. Put the alternator on top. You know, it's something you need to get to. You got to think about these things. You will have much better karma when thousands of owners, mechanics, you name it, try to dig this stuff out of where you put it. For God's sakes, this is a ridiculous place for an alternator. I put a long pry bar here across to hold the body of the alternator against whatever it's leaning on over there. Not very heavy, but geez, think about these things when you put these cars together. There's my little gripe. But you can see here that by supporting it, I was able to finagle the main wire over the stud and the locating tab there. With that screwdriver wedge holding it there, I can just kind of reach in here, get these started. That's a 12 millimeter to tighten that up. Then you wobble the boot over it. This plug should be easy once I have that helping support the unit. In fact, that little small amount of tapping I showed on that thread insert, you just want 2 thousandths, 5 thousandths, and that thing slips right over the bracket. You won't be doing additional swearing at the engineers. At least that part there can be made a little easier. And that wasn't too bad, but take the time to put that rubber boot over. That's a lot of juice straight from the battery there. You don't want anything hitting that. The inside of this connector, somebody else showed with one of the videos, you can see how the quick release mechanism works right there, a little tab to release it. And it did take a little tiny screwdriver to kind of help break it loose. You don't want to yank those wires out of place. That'll be a big mystery. And it should just, with this thing supported, it should snap back in right there. I should mention that these little bosses on the back of the alternator body that have threaded holes, maybe for other applications. These are used in lots of different vehicles. Nissan chose to put some kind of hose clamp, harness clamp over here with a little sort of a self-tapping. What a nightmare. Don't feel bad if you don't want to reinstall those things in the hole. Where's that harness going to go? It made it even more tedious to remove. But I don't want this to be nothing but complaining, but for God's sakes, this really is, in all my experience, the worst location for an alternator I've ever had to deal with. Let's see here. The harness should help support it. There you go, let's see. I managed to wobble it up and cock it slightly on the bracket to hold itself in position. So now I'm going to have to hold it with one hand and slip the bolt through. It's all plugged in now. So we're making good progress. Whew, there we go. I managed to reach my hand over the kind of the upper A-arm over here on the left. I was able to start the bolt. I can just pretty much run this in by hand through the threaded eyelet on the other end. So yeah, I've shown the installation, and everybody else has shown the removal. So how about we say the removal is the reverse of the installation here. Everything's nice and clean. I got some good light. And you can see what it takes oftentimes to put it in. It really helps to get it out. The most difficult thing I mentioned, the most tedious thing, was that wire harness attached to the back of the those threaded bosses. That was, you could not reach in there to pry those out. And I'm certainly not going to reinstall them. One final note. You know, I showed how to break loose that threaded insert, knocking it outward to make it easier to slip the alternator on. So here's one little caution about that, is that bolt can seem tight when in fact you're really going to want to crank on it, because you need to pull that insert back up against that aluminum bracket. And so right now I tightened it with my 3/8 drive down here, and it felt tight, but you can still wobble it. I went and got my 1/2-inch drive. It's actually a 9/16, but I find them mostly interchangeable with a 14. But we're going to see here, we're going to apply some leverage to this and make very certain that that alternator is tight on that mount. And we draw that little threaded insert back up against the bracket. So this is going to take both hands, so there's not much here to show me huffing and puffing. But good luck with this installation. I hope this helps. That's the bottom line here. There's the troublesome guy right there.